In 1845, a devastating fungus swept through Ireland, turning the lifeblood of millions into a graveyard of decay. The once verdant fields of potato plants wilted and blackened, leaving behind a stench that hung over entire counties. Families whose diets had relied solely on potatoes for generations found themselves faced with empty plates and gnawing hunger. Over the next 7 years, nearly 1 million souls perished, while another million attempted to escape the nightmare, crammed into overcrowded ships, many succumbing before reaching safe shores. This catastrophe marked one of the gravest humanitarian disasters of the 19th century, all centered around a single crop, a humble root vegetable that had been scorned by much of Europe. But the story of the potato stretches far beyond the green fields of Ireland. It begins thousands of years earlier, in the remote peaks of the Andes Mountains, roughly 8,000 years ago. Here, high above the clouds, wild potato plants thrived among rocky, windswept soils at altitudes above 12,000 feet. These were not the golden tubers known today. They were small, bitter, and often toxic. The indigenous peoples living in these harsh mountains learned to navigate the perils of the wild potato, discovering through generations of trial and error that soaking the tubers in cold by exposing these soaked potatoes to the freezing and thawing cycles of the high altitude, where nighttime temperatures plunged below zero, they could break down the remaining harmful compounds. This painstaking process required immense patience and a deep understanding of nature, though the farmers of old could not articulate it in scientific terms. Yet they succeeded. Over thousands of years, by selectively replanting the least bitter tubers, they gradually bred out the poison and cultivated. As the Inca Empire rose around the 1400s, the potato had transformed into something remarkable, with farmers cultivating over 3,000 distinct varieties. Some tubers glistened in bright yellow, others shone deep purple, while some were red, white, or even black, their shapes varying from smooth to gnarled and twisted. Each variety thrived in specific altitudes and microclimates, showcasing an agricultural science that the Inca faced a challenge that would baffle European farmers for centuries: how to store this precious crop. Fresh potatoes rot quickly, especially in a world devoid of refrigeration. Yet the Inca mastered a technique known as chuño. They spread freshly harvested potatoes across the high-altitude ground to freeze solid during the night. As the sun warmed the mountainside, families stomped on the frozen tubers. Chuño could be preserved for years, a logistical marvel that sustained Inca armies during long campaigns and entire cities during lean harvest years. It became an integral part of Inca life, even measuring time by how long it took to cook a pot of potatoes and distance by how much chuño a traveler would need. The potato was not merely a crop. It was the cornerstone of one of the largest empires in pre-Columbian history. However, the eventual bearers of the potato to the world had little appreciation for this agricultural triumph. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in South America in the 1530s, their eyes were fixated on gold and silver, riches that glittered in staggering quantities. The humble potato, it drew barely a glance, consumed at nearly every meal by the conquered peoples. Some potatoes were brought back to the Iberian Peninsula by Spanish soldiers around 1570, but they evoked no excitement. Instead, they were viewed as a cheap provision for long voyages, a simple food for the sick and poor. The Spanish crown, engrossed in counting Inca treasures, had no interest in promoting a crop considered fit for the savages of the land. When the potato finally reached Europe in the late 1500s, reactions ranged from suspicion to outright horror. Europeans were accustomed to noble grains that grew above ground, basking in sunlight. Wheat, barley, oats, and rye were revered. Bread made from grain was viewed as a divine gift. In stark contrast, the potato grew underground, in darkness, its lumpy form resembling the very roots of a... The associations were dire. In France, rumors linked the potato to leprosy, leading to its ban in 1596. The Orthodox Church in Russia condemned it as the devil's apple, warning that consumption was a sin. In Germany and Switzerland, it was blamed for a litany of ailments, and Scottish Presbyterians rejected it on theological grounds, declaring that a food not mentioned. For nearly 2 centuries, the potato languished in gardens as a botanical curiosity, admired for its ornamental flowers but hardly consumed. Wealthy individuals cultivated it as a status symbol, while the poor felt insulted when offered potatoes instead of bread. The class associations were stark. Bread was civilized, while this stagnant perception would not last. War and famine shifted the landscape, along with the influence of a few determined leaders. The pivotal moment arrived in Prussia under Frederick II, known as Frederick the Great. His kingdom faced relentless wars, with invading forces burning grain crops to induce famine. But a crop that thrived underground held military potential. In 1756, Frederick enacted the Kartoffelbefehl, compelling peasants to plant potatoes under threat of severe punishment. Yet the response was tepid. Villagers viewed potatoes as fit only for animals. They sent messages to the king, insisting that potatoes had no smell or taste and that even dogs would refuse them. Frederick's patience grew thin with this, but he was clever. According to legend, Frederick devised an ingenious plan. Instead of threatening his subjects, he created a royal potato garden on the outskirts of Berlin, surrounded by uniformed soldiers. The message was clear. If the king required armed guards to protect these plants, they must be of extraordinary value. Prussian peasants began sneaking into the garden at night, stealing seed potatoes for themselves. This, it is said, was Frederick's intent all along. Whether every detail of this tale is accurate remains debated among historians, but the outcome is undeniable. Within a generation, the potato became a staple across Prussia and northern Germany. Meanwhile, across the border in France, a man named Antoine-Augustin Parmentier fought a similar battle, but with more flair. Parmentier had served as a pharmacist in the French army during the 7 Years' War, where he was captured by Prussian forces and held prisoner for 3 years. His captors fed him primarily potatoes. Day after day, meal after meal, he did not perish. He did not contract leprosy, nor did he lose his sanity or morals. Remarkably, he emerged from captivity in better health than many soldiers who had eaten the standard French military diet. This experience led Parmentier to question everything France believed about the potato. Upon his return, he committed himself to a singular mission: to convince the French people to embrace the potato. He hosted extravagant dinner parties for Parisian high society, where every course from appetizer to dessert was made from potatoes. He presented potato blossoms to King Louis XVI, who tucked one into his buttonhole, proudly displaying it throughout the palace. He persuaded Queen Marie Antoinette to wear them in her hair during court events. Transforming the potato, Parmentier then executed a clever variation of Frederick's strategy. He planted a large potato field in the sandy, infertile soil of the Sablons Plain outside Paris. During the day, armed guards were stationed to protect the field's apparent importance. At night, however, the guards mysteriously vanished, allowing curious Parisians to sneak in and steal the plants. Parmentier was essentially conducting a one-man public relations campaign for the potato, decades before such a concept even existed. His efforts bore fruit. By the late 1700s, France began to accept the potato as food. Today, the French honor Parmentier with classic dishes like Hachis Parmentier, a French take on shepherd's pie, and various landmarks named in his memory, including a metro station and a boulevard. While France and Prussia slowly warmed to the potato through clever marketing and royal endorsements, a far more dangerous situation unfolded across the English Channel on the island of Ireland. In the 1700s, Ireland was under British rule, with most land owned by English and Anglo-Irish Protestant landlords who rarely visited their estates. Irish Catholic peasants, making up the vast majority of the population, worked as tenant farmers, toiling on small plots of land they did not own, and British policies like the penal laws systematically restricted Irish Catholics from inheriting property, buying land, or entering certain professions. Families were crammed onto smaller plots of increasingly poor, rocky, boggy soil. Many survived on parcels of just 1 or 2 acres. The potato emerged as the perfect crop for this harsh reality. 1 acre of potatoes could feed a family of 6 for an entire year, far surpassing any other crop. The potato flourished in soil where grain would fail, thriving in Ireland's cool, wet climate that rendered wheat and barley unreliable. It required minimal equipment or investment to cultivate. A family needed only a spade, some seed potatoes, and rain, which Ireland had. A diet of potatoes and buttermilk could sustain life indefinitely. The nutritional balance was surprisingly complete, carbohydrates, vitamin C, B6, potassium, and even protein. When buttermilk was added for fat and calcium, families could survive comfortably. This diet supported Ireland's population, which surged from roughly 3 million in 1700 to over 8 million. However, this reliance on the potato contained a catastrophic flaw, easily foreseen by anyone familiar with agriculture. Nearly all of Ireland's potatoes came from a single variety known as the Irish lumper. Farmers did not cultivate multiple types, they grew one. This genetic homogeneity meant that if disease struck one plant, it could wipe out every potato in Ireland. As the clock of calamity ticked, Ireland remained blissfully unaware. In the late summer of 1845, a cargo ship carrying potatoes from the Americas docked at a European port. Hidden within those potatoes were microscopic spores of Phytophthora infestans, a water mold that thrived in the cool, wet conditions of the Irish climate. The blight spread to Belgium and the Netherlands, destroying potato crops. Before the devastation was almost instantaneous. Healthy potato plants wilted and rotted overnight. Farmers discovered entire acres of thriving crops had collapsed into foul-smelling mush. When they dug into the soil, the potatoes had turned into putrid pulp. The stench was unbearable in parts of Western Ireland, particularly in counties like Mayo, Galway. The first year was catastrophic, but the true apocalypse unfolded when the blight returned in 1846, worse than before, and again in 1847 and 1848. Year after year, the potatoes rotted in the ground. Families without alternative food sources began dying in their homes, on the roadsides, and in ditches where crops had failed. Diseases swept through the weakened population, and from 1845 to 1852, roughly 1 million Irish people died from starvation and the ensuing diseases. Another million emigrated, many on ships so overcrowded and disease-ridden they became known as coffin ships. Ireland's population plummeted by roughly 25% in less than a decade, a number it has never. The British response exacerbated the crisis. While Irish families starved, Ireland continued to export grain, butter, and livestock to England under military escort. Relief efforts were slow, underfunded, and laden with degrading conditions. Starving men were forced to perform hard labor, building roads leading nowhere, for wages too small. Charles Trevelyan, a senior British Treasury official overseeing famine relief, described the catastrophe as divine judgment on a morally inferior people. He argued against providing too much aid, fearing it would foster dependence on charity. The famine wasn't merely a natural disaster. It was a catastrophe worsened by political indifference and deliberate policy choices. If the potato had once raised Ireland, the blight brought it crashing down in unimaginable horror. The consequences rippled beyond the island itself, reshaping the world as waves of Irish immigrants fled to America and beyond. They carried with them a deep generational anger toward the British government, a fury that ignited Irish nationalist movements for decades and ultimately contributed to Irish independence in 1922. The Great Famine did not merely empty Ireland. It scattered Irish communities, culture, and grievances across the English-speaking world. The echoes of this scattering resonate even today. Yet, in a twist of fate, the famine did not tarnish the potato's reputation. Instead, it highlighted the crop's undeniable importance. The world learned a critical lesson: never put all your hopes into a single genetic variety. The call to diversify emerged, urging farmers. Plant breeders across Europe and the Americas began their quest for new potato varieties resistant to Phytophthora infestans. Agricultural scientists initiated seed potato programs, ensuring the genetic diversity needed to prevent future disasters. What once threatened to annihilate Ireland instead sparked a revolution in scientific potato farming. Long before the Irish famine, Russia grappled with its own battles over potatoes. Catherine the Great had tried to promote potato cultivation in the 1760s, distributing seeds across her vast empire. However, Russian peasants resisted fiercely, leading to violent potato riots in the 1840s. Villages erupted against officials, forcing them to grow the crop, burning fields and attacking. Despite the resistance, the government prevailed. By the 1850s and 60s, a mix of pressure, agricultural reform, and dire hunger compelled peasants to embrace potatoes as a staple alongside bread. By the early 1900s, Russia emerged as one of the largest potato producers, earning it the nickname. In China, European traders and missionaries introduced the potato in the 17th century, but it remained a mere curiosity for years. That changed when farmers in Yunnan, Sichuan, and Guizhou discovered the potato thrived in the high altitudes where rice and wheat could not. By the mid-20th century, China had become the world's largest potato producer, growing over 90 million metric tons annually. India followed a similar path. The British brought potatoes to the subcontinent in the late 1700s, but it took decades for the crop to spread beyond small experimental plots. Once adopted by farmers, production soared. Today, India ranks as the second largest potato producer, with the crop deeply embedded in its cuisine, often forgotten as a. Across Africa, the potato arrived later but spread rapidly, especially in the East African highlands. Nations like Kenya, Ethiopia, Rwanda, and Uganda embraced potato cultivation in the 20th century, finding that the crop thrived in their cool climates. The UN and Food and Agriculture Organization now deem the potato a vital tool against hunger and malnutrition, prompting several African nations to launch national potato program. Globally, the potato stands as the fourth most important food crop, producing over 300 million metric tons each year across more than 150 countries. Its scale today would astound an Inca farmer. French fries, likely originating in Belgium or France in the late 1700s, are a multi-billion-dollar industry and arguably the most popular cooked food on. Americans consume around 50 pounds of frozen potato products per person each year, primarily as fries. The potato chip, supposedly invented in 1853 by a frustrated chef in Saratoga Springs, has become an immense industry. Each American eats about 30 pounds of fresh potatoes and another 17 pounds of chips annually, with McDonald's alone using over 3 billion pounds for their fries. But potatoes serve more than just culinary purposes. Potato starch plays a crucial role in manufacturing paper, textiles, adhesives, and biodegradable plastics. Vodka, one of the world's most consumed spirits, has traditionally been made from potatoes in Poland, Scandinavia, and Russia for centuries. During World War II, German chemists even turned potato starch into synthetic rubber for military tires when natural supplies dwindled. In 1995, the potato became the first vegetable cultivated in outer space. NASA and the University of Wisconsin successfully grew potato plants aboard the Columbia Space Shuttle, paving the way for future long-duration missions. Agricultural scientists anticipate that if humanity settles on the Moon or Mars, the potato will be among the first crops planted. Think of it, a crop once considered beneath notice by the Spanish, blamed for leprosy in France, and labeled the devil's fruit by Russians, is now the leading candidate for feeding humans on Mars. The potato, starting as a poisonous weed thriving in the Andes, underwent a transformation through millennia of cultivation. It built empires, survived tragedies, and evolved into one of humanity's greatest agricultural triumphs, spreading across continents and soon perhaps beyond the stars. It's not bad for a lumpy root vegetable once ignored.